Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights. With LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today we're speaking with a production designer. Among his credits are Selma, The Whale, The Underground Railroad, and The Joker. We're pleased to welcome Mark Friedberg. Mark, thank you for doing this.
Thank you. It's nice to talk with you.
Our first question is going to be our normal first question, which is, how did you get to where you are today? Is this something you started feeling you wanted to do as a kid, or did you go down another path and then find it later? How did you get into the business? Where did you grow up? Tell us your story.
Native New Yorker, born on the Upper West Side, early 60s. It was a very gritty, different place than it is now. My father was the son of a dairy inspector, come to the big city and had made his name as a pretty successful landscape architect, or in the early 60s, he was having his first successes. Cinema was always vital to us. We went to a movie on the weekend and we talked about that movie during the week, and it was just part of our family culture. I never really imagined that I could work on movies and call that my job when I was growing up. And in fact, wasn't really clear on what a production designer was or did. I understood design. I grew up with, in fact, because I grew up with designers, my father's friends, I didn't want to be a designer. I certainly didn't want to be an architect. I knew how that story goes. And so I thought I would do something involving social justice. That was probably the trajectory I was on. And given the fact that I was a Jewish kid from the Upper West Side, there was a lot of pressure for that to be involved being a lawyer somehow. My mom said it was because I was good at arguing. But unfortunately for her, she passed when I was young. My secret strategy had been do what mom wants until maybe I'm about 40 and all of the sort of grown-up stuff is set up, and then go be an artist or go do what I want to do or find something fulfilling to do, because I was pretty sure being a lawyer wasn't going to be that, even though social justice is still something I work on and I care about. Doing it that way wasn't the way I wanted to do it. And that my mother passed early when I was just out of high school reframed my idea of maybe when I should start to pursue what I want to do. It became very clear that life is temporal and provides no insurance that you will have more. And so I really was a pretty lost kid at that point, right? Getting out of college in a good way. I went to college kind of with an idealist interest in education in a general sense, in the way that we used to think about liberal arts. Everyone in 1985, when I graduated college, was going to law school or business school or some school.
Whoa.
Had already a career with many, many figures of salary lined up and had it all figured out. I just didn't understand that. I thought you go to college and then you figure it out. But no, that wasn't the way it was starting in Reagan's America. And here we are. But as a result, I came back to the city and I got a job at the Pace Gallery through a friend. During my time, I was an art major and an American history major somehow at Brown and RISD. You can matriculate at both places at the same time. And I thought art was it. I thought I'd always painted, I'd always made art. I was a studio sculpture major, and I thought that's what I would end up doing, and that working at the Pace Gallery would give me insight into the art world. And it did. It made me run from the art world. It was terrifying. I mean, no offense to artists, some of whom are my friends who show there, and all power to artists who make money, but it wasn't about art. the experience there. It was really much more about commerce. And it was a little bit terrifying to me. And at that time, working at the Pace Gallery was kind of like working at MoMA, but you could buy everything. It was Rothko. It was Picasso's sketchbooks. I had Picasso's 1906 Damozel's sketchbook in my desk at one point. It was amazing, but it was, for those same reasons, I think, disconnected me from the idea of what being art was. And somewhere around 3 or 4 months in, after I had been criticized for wearing colorful sneakers that was distracting the clients from the paintings, seriously, a friend of mine, I'm going to get in so much trouble if Arnie Glimshaw watches this. Hi, Arnie. But my friend Jack said, hey, I'm going to San Francisco to write a screenplay with Randy, who's already out there. You want to come along for the ride? And I said, yeah, I do. And I put all my possessions in a duffel bag and piled my dog, his dog, our 2 duffel bags into a very small old beater car, and off we went for the next 2 years. It was supposed to be a drive cross country. And I finally had my beat time.
Your Jack Kerouac period.
Yeah. I mean, I've always had a book in my hand since I could read. And at that time in my life, those books were written by those guys who went off into the world looking for truth, looking for whatever it is they found. Reading on the road, thinking about on the road, that book, and reading it are 2 different things. When you reflect on it, it's a magical journey of an existential journey of finding yourself. But it's really a book about loneliness and depression. And that's a big part of what being on the road is. And that time for me was wayward. I was making sculptures on street corners. I'd literally begged for money on the streets of San Francisco at one point, and was surprised how eager people were to give it to us. Mostly it was our dogs. But anyway, we zoomed around the country. I zoomed around the country. I lived in San Francisco for a while. I went back and forth. And I landed in Massachusetts, where I did end up working for a Ralph Nader-led canvas, going door to door, working on a Superfund bill, a group called Massberg. And I mention that only because the job required getting people, a team of people, to go out every night into this to do something hard and then having them come back, keeping them from quitting and keeping them inspired, reminding us all why we were there and keeping the whole thing going. And I think maybe that was the best training I ever had for the management part of production design, which we could talk about later, but it's a big part of what it is. It's like being an artist and running an army at the same time. Those 2 things don't always seem like they should go together, but it's kind of cool when they do. Anyway, I came back to New York after a year and a half of getting yelled at by people at their front door and running this canvas, and got a phone call from a friend who was working in the Woody Allen production office at that time. And at lunch, her phone rang and a very loud sound came out of it, and it made her sad, and she started tearing up. And I said, what happened? She said, someone just yelled at me. I said, why? She said, well, the driver for our costume designer quit, and he doesn't have anybody, and he's so upset. And then, hey, wait a minute. Do you think you could drive Jeff Kurland around tomorrow? I said, tomorrow I'll do it, but I don't want to be. Spent a lot of time in a car the last couple of years, I think, maybe. Okay. So I get in the car with Jeff Kurland, who's a great friend and the first movie person I ever worked for or with, and drove him from his house on 68th Street to Bloomingdale's on 60th Street, and waited outside for 8 hours and drove him back. Welcome to the film business. And
Carry on waiting.
Yeah. And Jeff at the end, Jeff said, great job. Would you like the job? I said, no, I don't want that job. And he said, why? And I panicked a little bit. And the excuse I came up with is my dog. I can't leave my dog alone. And I will note that all those Kerouac-ing wayward adventures were me and my dog in the back of a pickup truck. Anyway, the short story is Jeff hired me and the dog, and we drove him around together for a year or 2. And every once in a while, with Woody in the backseat, not liking the big dog idea. I think my third day in the film business, I spent the day in a car with Jenna Rollins. I think the next week I spent a week in the car with Gene Hackman, only talking about painting. And it was kind of cool. Also, being a kid from the Upper West Side, Woody Allen meant a lot to us. I mean, he was, I don't know what he was, but I don't know what he is, but what he was back then was someone that we all paid a lot of attention to, and one of our better filmmakers, and certainly a place that very talented people found themselves. My first job was another woman. I think that was Sven Nyquist. The second job I did was New York Stories, which was Woody, Scorsese, and Coppola, and Sven and Nestor Almendros shot, I think, the Scorsese, and Storaro shot the Coppola. That's one movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, those guys are smart. After a while, they let me out of the van, which was pretty exciting. The big breakthrough for me was when I figured out what a best boy was, which my entire childhood I wanted not only to know, but to be. And I wasn't the best boy. And there was a point at which the movie emergency happened, as is often the case, and there needed to be something made, and there was nobody to make it. For one scene with Woody and Julie Kavner, they needed some sort of quasi-African-ish masks made. And Jeff Santo, who was the designer, wanted nothing to do with it, and Jeff couldn't quite figure it out. And all of a sudden, the dials spun to the kid in the front seat, and they said, aren't you an artist? I said, yes, when you let me out of the car, I go home at night and I paint. And they said, will you make these masks for us? And I said, well, if you'll let me out of the van, I could try. And I did, and I made the masks, and they got on the actors, and they got in the movie. And I've been making stuff my whole life. I mean, up to that point, my life was 23 or 4 years, 23 and a half years old. But I had, not 24 years old. But I had never really, maybe a painting in the synagogue art show. I had my senior thesis at college, but seeing something you made in a movie blew my mind. And they paid me. And I thought, oh, wow, this is kind of interesting. So meanwhile, that same friend who I had driven off to San Francisco with had written a screenplay with Randy Poster, the great music supervisor and my best friend. So Jack and Randy wrote a movie called A Matter of Degrees. Randy raised money dollar by dollar, enough to make it. I think closed in on $1 million somewhere along the lines. It was loosely based on our time at college. And they were going up to make the movie and asked me to come. And being the person who knew what a best boy was, I was the most experienced filmmaker on the team at that point. The director's wife was hired initially to be the designer, but that didn't last a week. And again, the needle spun my way. And Randy said, Mark, can you design this movie? And I said, well, what does that mean? And the producer said, it's pretty simple. Trust your eye and don't spend any money. And that was his advice to me. And with a few of my art school friends, literally, I think 2 or 3, one who knew how to paint and one who knew how to weld, and a pickup truck, which was basically the art department budget, we set off to make this very sort of personal, independent film, which took us to Sundance and Berlin, and it was a bigger world all of a sudden. And I had designed a movie. So I came back. Wow. I came back to New York. Now, and again, I designed A Matter of Degrees. If I made $500, I'd be lucky. I mean, that was really a sort of an art project with friends. But I had done it. It was now an official thing. And I went to Santo, and I said, look, Santo, I did this thing, and I'd been drafting since I was 5 because my father made me, and I make models. I hate doing that stuff, or I thought I did, but now I can see how I can use it this way. And what do you think? And shouldn't we work together? And I should work for you, Santo. And he said, no, you should not. You should design. You're a designer now. And I said, what? I didn't know what a best boy was 6 months ago. I just went up and played around with my art school friends and made stuff. People took pictures in it. And now you're saying I'm a designer. He said, yeah, that's pretty much it. And I said, well, what do I do now? He said, we'll figure it out. And he was incredibly generous and helpful, or he just sent all the stuff he didn't want to do my way. But he was generous to the point where now, if anybody sends me an email, and here I'm putting this out into the world, I don't mean to be, but people send me an email every once in a while asking for some time to talk or career advice, or maybe to talk about work. And I have made a pact with myself based on what Santo did for me, that anybody who calls gets attention, because it doesn't take that much of our time to change somebody's life, to reorient an entire life. And sometimes that's with perspective. Sometimes that's with opportunity. And sometimes it happens over time. And some of those people have turned into close collaborators. Some of them are great designers now that I've been doing this forever. So Santo was incredibly generous with me, on top of being the most talented human being I ever met. And it really helped give me enough credibility to get slightly better paying jobs. This is 1990, 1991, and there's a real independent thing happening in New York. It's cool. New York wasn't a film hub then. There was the group who made the Woody Allen movies, and if there was a studio feature coming to town, those guys got it. They were the crew, pretty much. I'm sure, Roger, you know some of those guys. And
actually, I know them because I started out in New York.
Yeah. Okay, so you know that. And now all of a sudden there was this new thing happening: young people making movies, and it was a great time to come alive. Ang was just getting going, and in fact, probably the big break for me, having done a few movies along the way, was The Ice Storm.
I want to hear about In the Soup first, because that came first, right?
Yeah, it did.
I mean, that's definitely
it's one of James's favorite movies. No. She talks about it a lot.
No.
Well, In the Soup was, I think, number 2 for me after A Matter of Degrees. There were a few small. There was a 30-minute sort of a vanity short that someone was making, to help their career along. But it was a pretty good piece, and it was Joaquin at 10 years old. Was the star of that. I forget what that was called, Walking the Dog or something like that. And then there was infomercials, one with Captain Lou Albano, some really sort of public access kind of activity going on. And finally, I get a call from Alex Rockwell, about doing this movie In the Soup, which I read it. It was cool. I didn't have sort of anything to compare to. It was unusual. And he was passionate. There wasn't a lot of money. And it was a pretty straightforward. A lot of it took place in a small apartment. And then there were some other weird sets along the way. So it said 4th floor tenement. So I found a 4th in the script. I read it, said it right there. So I made the crew climb up to a 4th floor tenement, which was okay. Lesson learned. I get it. I won't do that again here. Can I help you with that? I'm sorry. It's so heavy. Actually, the movie crashed once. I had found most of the furniture for that apartment on the street, partly because we didn't have any money, but also because that was a skill I had developed, dumpster diving. And then the movie went down. And so we put the stuff back on the street, and I found it. And then the movie came back up 6 months later or 3 months later, and I found that same furniture for sale at an antique store. And they wouldn't let me use it. And they wanted lots of money to have my garbage back. So I'm not sure if that was a film lesson or a life lesson, but it might be a studio financing lesson. Here comes this movie. The crew of that movie was yours truly. There may have been a day or two where we had 1 or 2 other people. I think actually Ginger Tugos, my friend from Brown, who had worked with me on Matter of Degrees, came in for a little bit of that. But it was like, you're the designer and the PA and the transportation coordinator and the carpenter. And for me, I could do all those things. I painted houses. My dad, if something broke, we fixed it. So it was sort of practical. I was excited because I figured out how to make the wall between 2 tenements, 250-year-old tenements, move myself. And that was a big engineering achievement. But anyway, that was a crazy experience. That movie was a crazy experience. Steve Buscemi is one of the greatest, nicest, as you probably know, people there ever was. Yeah. And the rest of them were crazy. But fun crazy. We had fun. I also wasn't like I thought I was starting a career. That just wasn't where my mind was. I just was doing something cool. And that's all I was really hoping for. I actually thought it was kind of silly that people paid you to do this fun thing. And also, but I'm working on, $1 million movies, and the stakes are kind of different. There's no studios. There's nobody telling you you're doing it wrong. In fact, if you do anything, people think it's kind of incredible that you were able to find a chair somewhere. But it was cool. I liked Alex. I liked that movie, and it was fun to make. It was stylized. Phil Parmet shot that. That guy was cool. I never got to work with him again, and he didn't work that much after that and on dramatic stuff. But he could just come from Nashville, and he was an interesting guy. So anyway, then that movie, and like I said, I had been doing stuff enough to stay alive, but nothing anybody would have heard about, certainly not enough to hear about to get you another job. But In the Soup went to Sundance and got a prize. And when you get a prize, then people call you. So it's one of the weird things about our business that I'm unsure about how I feel about it, the sort of priziness of it. But anyway, it got an audience prize, which was cool. And all of a sudden there was a movie I worked on in a theater, and people saw it, and it was fun. And it sort of, I think it's why I got called for Ice Storm.
So you didn't know Ang Lee at the time. You just got called cold for it, did you?
I knew the guys from Good Machine because I knew Ted Hope better than James Seamus at that point, because Ted had been like a my level production guy in the city. And when I say my level, I mean low level. We were, making seriously independent stuff. There was a bunch of SVA people making films in New York, and Ted was working with them. And I think Ted must have thrown my name in the ring for some reason. And that's actually an interesting story, how I got that job story. But I will say that Ang did go to film school with my wife, Lydia Dean Pilcher. So she knew Ang, but I don't think he knew me. I didn't know him through her, and they weren't friends at that. They were friendly from school, but they weren't friends at that point. And she's in the film business at this point, and she's doing real job. Oh wait, yeah, Ice Storm. I was with Lydia. That was our first or second with baby movie. But anyway, yeah. So I met Ang for Ice Storm, and this is a movie about a 13-year-old kid in 1976, and that's not something I needed to research too much, having been a 13-year-old kid in 1976. And it's a movie a little bit about culture and about the weird way we are back then, still are a little bit. And I had a lot to say about it. I just had a lot to say about it. I grew up in a house with no upholstery. Everything in our house was white on white on white on white. The furniture was made of sheetrock. My dad was a 60s purist designer. That was where he came from. Yeah, it was. And, when you look at that stuff, it's cool. But when you grow up that way, you're jealous of your friends who doors and couches and all these cool things. So I go to meet Ang for that interview, and I'm ready to talk about the 60s and about these characters. And I'm sit down with Ang, and he says, "Before you start, you're an artist, right?" I said, "Sometimes." "Why?" He said, "Tell me about Cubism." I said, "Oh, that wasn't the question I was expecting today." And we ended up having a 2-hour conversation about sort of simultaneous multiple perspectives and deconstruction and perception and the time of seeing and maybe how that happens in a painting could also happen in a story. And it was and it was a very sort of Angus brilliant, obviously, but it's hard to know that sometimes from talking to him, because he uses about 4 words, and he'll ask a question in a way that seems so sort of simple and innocent, and you'll realize, well, no, he doesn't talk a lot because he's thinking a lot, and those ideas are just distilling or fermenting into something strong. And so the idea of the picture plane, the idea of deconstructed family as well, emotionally, as well as a deconstructed storytelling style came into focus. One of the painters we looked at after that a lot was Alex Katz, whose eye lines always miss. No one's ever really looking at each other. They're just kind of looking by each other. And there's a sense of haunting isolation and beauty at the same time. It's kind of cool. And we embrace that. The other question I asked me is, can you make ice? One thing I learned from my father was just say yes. If you want to get the job, just say yes. Honesty will get you nowhere. So I said, of course we can make ice. The art department, ice. Make ice all the time. Ice. That's before ice was a dirty word. But anyway, nobody wanted to make ice in Hollywood. I called every big effects person, and nobody could figure out how to make it clear if it wasn't real, if it wasn't actually frozen water, which was kind of a bummer because I had promised. And also it was in the title of the movie and I had to make a lot of it. And we were shooting in May. So I went to my friends in the theater. I mean, the thing of it is a lot of what we do is about figuring it out. You can go to school and learn theories. You can, I'm not telling anybody what to do, just in my experience. You can certainly learn a lot, maybe even from other students in a lot of ways. And maybe that's a great reason to go to school. But in our business, you gotta just do it to do it, I think. And it's just so much about figuring things out. And that's also what sometimes makes it better when you don't know and you have to figure it out, maybe close to being in the moment, and cool things can happen. So we ended up, the scenic department took on a lot of the ice issues, and it became actually something that we formed and didn't just sort of spray around and have, but we actually placed and made, and were careful about it. And we had hair gel, what turned out to be a very good solution for glass. And we had people in hazmat suits making resin icicles that kept getting moved from place to place. And then I don't know. So if you're from New York, did you know the Ottoson brothers? Did you ever know those guys, the Ottisons?
No.
They were old time effects guys from Wisconsin, had moved to New York. John and Ronnie. John was 6'3", 380. Ronnie was 6'5", 580. The biggest people I ever met. And Ronnie was the engineer brain. He didn't talk a lot, but he was super smart. But when these guys walked into the room, nobody said anything for a long time. They bearded, ZZ Top like, but also incredible, and like also not having it from anybody. Like, okay, this is what you generally said to them. But I liked him, and I liked John, and he's the guy who said, "Yeah, I can make ice." Of course, when I called him, he said, "But I'm on a cabin on the side of a hill in Wisconsin. It's 20 below right now. Why don't you come shoot it here?" And I said, "Well, we're going to shoot in Westchester in May, if that works for you." And so he came up with some organic, I hope, compound that was like a gel, and that the technical term was splooge, I think that we called it. And they drove I remember them pulling into New Canaan. The town of New Canaan forbade us to shoot there, even though they had permitted, because somebody picked up the book and read it and realized what an indictment of that place it was. So we're standing on the street, not shooting that day. And this John Deere tractor with a very large trailer with two 1,000-pound vats, one with a spray painted A and one with a spray painted B, pull onto Main Street, New Canaan, ready to shoot. It was a thing. So anyway, but also I think the ice storm was where I wasn't trying to get it right because I actually knew it. It was personal. And I think up to then I was always terrified. I still couldn't figure out why anybody would hire me. I had done so little and there were people who had done so much, but I was in the right circumstance, I guess. And I also always worked hard and tried to do a good job. So I don't know. But then Ice Storm came along. It was a place where I felt like I've put myself into the story for the first time in a way that I encourage us all to do as artists more and more.
Can you talk about how you can combine the design of the sets with the costumes and everything else? How do you make it one? Because to me, I'm from England, but it felt fairly extreme in terms of its design, especially in the costumes. And they're very, very different. Every costume has a very distinct character, and the houses have very distinct characters.
Yeah, in Ice Storm, yeah. Well, Carol Oates did the wardrobe, and we worked pretty closely together. I had some. I think the design led some of that because when Ang brought me in, his idea was this was the classic American family, and it was a classic American story in Connecticut, and the houses should all be little colonials. And I said, no, they shouldn't. And I said, why not? And also back then I didn't know not to say no to the director. I said, no, I don't think I would do that. I think Janie Carver, first of all, New Canaan, this is the home of the Glass House. That's where Philip Johnson lived. That's where Marcel Breuer lived. It's a place. And even though it's in the suburbs, it was more than just a suburb. It was a place of significant design, at least architectural design, and it had also a very unique terrain. Westchester's pretty calm until you hit Connecticut, and that part of Connecticut it really starts to ripple, and that was why Ang forced us to go out of the zone and shoot there in a very cool way. So I wanted Janie Carver to have the 70s house. She was of the moment. She was going to dress like the time. She was going to tell us about 1976 and 77. Not everybody wears the fashion of the day in the real world. In fact, not nowhere. But she was that character for this story. And in fact, the furniture in what was her house came out of my dad's house. I actually took his chrome domed bedside tables and some of his other unupholstered furniture and some op art that he had from some of his friends, which was what was going on at the time. So I kind of cast my life a little bit in the Carver house, the place that Ben Hood thinks he wants to go, thinks he wants to be, but really the place that turns out to be the house of sadness in so many ways. Roger, so I'm working with the great Fred Elms for the first time, and that's a name I know, even I know at that point in my life.
Yeah.
And so I take Fred to this house I found. I'm so excited about it. It's got 8-foot high ceilings, and all the walls are glass. So I said, Fred, what do you think? And Fred says, what do you think? What are you trying to? What is it that you're trying to
kill
do
me?
to me? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, how do we light it? I said, lighting. So we ended up just doing tubes and corners, and because again I was sort of figuring it out as I went, had the idea that we would take all the facets of these sheetrock walls and just paint them a shade off to sort of torture the shadows a little bit. And I remember the art director coming in going, like a very experienced, knows what he's doing art director, who's actually a great designer in his own right, Bob Shaw, right now, coming to me going, what are you doing? You can't do that. You can't do that. I said, well, I just did it. But, and so all of a sudden, there was that. But the rest of the story was that I thought that Kevin Kline's character, the main family, the Hood family, should live in a contemporary, which is a terrifying word in the real estate world. It means badly modern or kind of modern or no details or lots of boxes stacked or something. I don't know, the word scares me. But I thought that was right for those guys. That Janie Carver had sort of taste of the moment. And even though it was the 70s, it was kind of cool what she had. Whereas the Hood family were actually the traditional American family. And in my thinking, that they were living in a contemporary house, not in a lean-to or a log cabin or a colonial house. But the Key Party house, the house of debauchery, that should be the big fancy Greenwich, Connecticut colonial. And that was just my idea, my instincts about culture and the way things would go. But I also thought it added a dynamic to the story. And it was pretty intuitive back then. I think I was more intuitive in my early years, and I'm finally getting back to that now. I didn't know better back then, and now I finally know better. And in the middle, I've been trying to get it right or do the right thing. So intuitively, my instinct was push the Key Party into the sort of classic America, really play with that. Let the sort of true Americans live in those stacked boxes, and then give Jane Carver, Sigourney's character, the sort of more Philip Johnson life. And the costumes a little bit followed that, I think, to some degree. We did a lot of research as well on that job. Jean Castelli used to work pretty carefully with Ang, the son of the great gallerist, who knew a little bit, obviously, about that time, his father having been one of the sort of creators of it. But he did an amazing job as a researcher. And we just had, 500-page research documents and all sorts.
It must have been quite different, though, coming from Independence in New York, where you're kind of doing a lot of categories. Everybody's pitching in to working with Ang that sounds a little more structured and like there are more departments.
Yes, it was, except that it was the same people moving up. Ang had been making pretty small movies as well. Wedding Banquet. I didn't work on those. His sort of Taiwanese comedies that he was doing in New York. And he was doing those with James and Ted already. In fact, I think that was the impetus for Good Machine in a kind of a way. So a lot of us we were trying on this idea of more grown-up filmmaking. And I think that was what was cool about it, is that, we had all the structures that we all know now and depend on, but we also still had this kind of youthful exuberance that and kind of belief that we could do anything. Ended up also building a lot of sets, which was also a new way of working for me. I had been building my whole life, and I had done a film before this called The Ballad of Little Joe, which was we had to build an entire town. That's actually a good story too. But
I was going to ask you about that movie because that was completely different. Yeah.
But these were my first stage sets, and that was a new idea. And so Bob Shaw and I become friends since working together on that job. He comes from a trained, traditional theater designer background. He knows architecture. He knows that every type of finial, every type of molding. And in fact, when we had to all of a sudden build a giant colonial house, I was very smart when it came to messing up the colors. But when it came to like, how do you do this? Bob was like, here, let me help you. And I was smart enough to let him help me. And we helped each other. I think I brought kind of, why can't it be this attitude to it? And he also brought me to the idea that there are skills that we do need to have. And if you do have them, you can use your try crazy things ideas with even more power. So that was, I don't know, it was a bellwether for me.
Did you choose The Ballad of Little Joe because it was something different, a Western?
It's funny that people think you make choices at that point in your career. Like the choice is eating or not eating. I got called to meet about that movie, and I think somewhere like 3/4 of the way through the interview, I realized they were trying to talk me into doing it because they couldn't get anybody else to go to Montana and build a town in 8 weeks with like $75,000. And I was like, $75,000? Wow, that's a lot of money. Sure, I'll go. And just to give you an idea, they wanted to shoot in 2 months. They didn't know what state they wanted to shoot in. Period movie with a built town. They had narrowed it down to Utah, Colorado, Montana, and I think New Mexico. They'd narrowed it down. And I said, and so then they come in, they said, well, we got to go on a scout to pick the place. And I said, and even at that point, I was like, well, don't we have to build it kind of soon? And they said, well, yeah, but we have to find the place soon. I said, well, let's look at the pictures. And we looked at all night. We looked at all these pictures from all these film commissioners from all these states. And my finger landed on Red Lodge, Montana. Again, like just trusting my gut and say, that looks cool. And not knowing enough not to trust it. I've learned, unfortunately, since then, I have to be careful sometimes. But back then, I was innocent, and I also wasn't like looking to have a career. I was looking to have experiences. And I think when I work that way, I do better work, and it's more fun. And when you just sort of, I don't know, you can get caught up in it all. And sometimes the things you get, the politics or whatever, sometimes feel like high school or something. And I don't know. I was a little, I don't know. So so anyway, I thought I had a lot of money. They thought they had tricked this idiot into going to somewhere out there, find a place. And on the way out there, I was trying to figure out, how are you going to do this? How are you going to build a town? But this is where being a student of history doesn't suck. For me, it's been the great resource is just knowing time, at least in this country, knowing how it's unfolded. And what I did understand was that most of the guys who went out to do mining were like me. They weren't grizzled miner-looking people who already had the right costumes on. They were Jewish kids from the Upper West Side who didn't know what to do with themselves. Someone said, if you go out there and bang this pick into the cave, you might get rich. And they went out there to try it. But they went out ill-prepared. 99% of them. Nobody knew what they were doing. Nobody knew what they were getting themselves into. And what it really became about for most of them right off the bat was shelter. And I sort of leaned into the idea that we had no time and we had no money. I said, this is going to be a method. That's what this is going to be a method. We are miners. We got to make shelter. Our town is going to, if we don't have time to get the roof on, it'll be canvas. And I had all these pictures to prove it. And I put an ad in the local paper saying, if you have an old barn that you don't like, we'll take it down for you. And back then, people didn't think old rotten barn wood was a valuable commodity, but now you can buy it in Soho. And so we got old wood. I got a logging permit from the forest. We were in a national forest. I got a logging permit and a gas generated mill, and I'd made lumber. And my only rule, and I hired 8 ranchers or 7 ranchers who were out of work because it was winter. That was the crew. And we had brought 1 painter from New York. And the rule I had was, you can use the chainsaws just because we don't have much time, but that's it. That's the only power tool we're going to use. And even that, we can't see those cuts. You can use it for the rough stuff, but we got to see axe cuts or saw cuts. It's the only way. And so again, I think that movie was made with integrity, partly because we didn't have a choice, and partly because we didn't have a choice. We leaned into it. If I was offered that job now, I'd be like, what, are you kidding? Forget it. I need 5 art directors. That was my trailer. But back then I was just happy. They gave me a 4x4 pickup truck and sent me into wagon trails in Montana and paid me. And I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And I made a town. It was cool. It's a really cool movie. Working with Declan also was, again, like I knew enough to learn from the people that had been doing it before. And I knew enough. I trusted my eye enough to know who I liked, what I liked. And Quinn was good. That guy's still good. And he helped me. And that was the other thing I figured out along the way between that movie and the Ice Storm was that we're not making sets. We're making pictures. At the end of the day, what matters is the thing that you look at from your seat, not the thing that you walk onto that day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big part of it. And it never bugged me. In fact, I loved it. I came out of my art studio where I was my own only collaborator, and whatever the ideas of the day were sort of generated from my own miseries. But this idea of collaboration was pretty cool. And I think I had gotten a taste of that doing the Ralph Nader canvassing work, the team part of that. The idea that with humans, 1 + 1 can equal 8. In a way that when 2 people or 4 people sort of put their efforts together, that the power that you can generate is exponential. So anyway, we made a town.
When you do a period piece, how much of a stickler are you for accuracy? Or do you sometimes say, well, maybe that's not absolutely accurate, but it feels right? Where do you stand on that?
Accuracy is a funny word when you're making art, but I think that it's such a busy thing that we try to do, so much work that we try to mash into such a short amount of time that we make rules to help ourselves do it. And sometimes those rules, I think, can be limiting. I think there's a lot of stuff that we put in films that is absolutely period perfect, but looks wrong. Right. And I don't want to put that in. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we put in movies that's made 20 years after the story was told, but it looks right. And I have no problem putting that in a movie.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example, because I thought a lot about it, because I am a person who studied history, because I know when I'm not doing it right way. I think if you do it because you're lazy, that maybe that's not the right way to do it. But if you feel like making a choice, we made The Underground Railroad. That's a movie about anachronisms. It's set ostensibly in 1850, but there's elevators and cars and all kinds of things that shouldn't be there. And that's what's cool about it. It's a story. Yeah. It's sparking our mind. We're thinking about things as opposed to a history book. I thought I was maybe making a biographical documentary, like Selma. I was a little bit more, I wanted to get some of that right. Because if I didn't, it would be distracting. And I don't want to distract from the story. But I also don't know that it's always wrong to, depending on the movie, sometimes play around with time. And in fact, I encourage it. So my example that comes to mind is Across the Universe, Julie Taymor, the first musical set to actual Beatles written music. And one of the characters, Dr. Robert, played by Bono, arrives in the magic bus. He's Timothy Leary. And Julie said, make that bus. Just make, it should be that bus. We should quote the Timothy Leary bus that says further on the back. It's a school bus all painted over. It's famous bit of 60s history. And I did. We had the most spectacular scenic painters in the world here in New York, and we painted it exactly perfectly. And I didn't like it. It looked old. It looked dead. And our story isn't about the 60s. It's about these characters living. They are living in that time, but they are living. If it's not contemporary, if we're not contemporary in the story that we're in, then we're looking at it. We're not living in it. And I didn't know what to do. But one thing I know is whenever I think of something that terrifies me, it probably is close to being a good idea. The things that scare me the most usually are the things you don't want to do them because they're painful and and they have extremely good chances of messing up. But when they're right, they're so right. So my thought on this one was to overlay our 60s hippie bus with Basquiat, even though we're 1968, and it blended in. We just blended in some much more 25-year later street art onto our hippie bus, and it gave it gas. And no one has ever said that bus isn't right. And it didn't need to be the exact bus. And no one's really even noticed that it's an anachronism. But in a way, it might have been more of an anachronism to the story. It might have been an antique in the story. It might have been more distracting because it was this thing that wasn't in the story, but that we know about. And instead, we made it ours and we made it alive. So where I come down on, I'm not the period police. If it's distracting, if it takes us out of the story, don't do it. But that's not because of period. That's because of anything.
Yeah.
And if it's bold and weird and it adds to the story, good. Or might add to the story, try it. But that's my big lesson to the kids I teach is if it doesn't make you nervous, it might not be worth doing. The things that we're very comfortable doing, we've done. I don't want to keep doing them over and over again. I want to just push it a little bit and see just to see what's there, to see what the possibilities are. It doesn't cost more to be interesting all the time. Sometimes it's cheaper.
So we talked with Barry Jenkins the other day, who had only the best
just
to
had a
say
baby.
about you. Yeah, he was just about to when we talked to him. That's great.
I have this big retrospective, and I sent him a video of it waiting to be get praise from him, and he sent back a video of the baby, and I was like, all right, you won. You win this round. That's a beautiful baby. Barry Jenkins. Barry Jenkins is one of the great human beings on the planet, let alone our business. Artist, but also just quality of human. What a great person he is.
Yeah. And he was telling us about Underground Railroad and about you guys learning that, you have no more budget for the rest of the episodes. How did you deal with that? He said you dealt with it well, but...
Underground Railroad is I'll just preface it by saying it might be the work I'm most proud of. What we did and what it is and where we are now. You couldn't make that movie in this administration. We'd get put in jail. And in fact, the making of that movie was not relaxing in the sense that there were a lot of people we met who kind of thought that, what was going on in 1850 was pretty good. Maybe we should go back to that. And I'm sorry to say there seem to be a lot of people who agree with that out there. I'm not saying anybody's advocating slavery, but we're doing some weird things publicly right now. But so the story is about America, the novel. It's a journey through America and through time. It's purposely anachronistic, and it takes places and it changes what they are. When our character gets to South Carolina, there's no slavery. But also, it turns out that secretly all the men are being sterilized. Actually, the women are being sterilized. We just don't know that. When they get to North Carolina, Black people are illegal. You can't be there. Not allowed to be there. It's a whole different thing. It's all about journeying through these horrors, which seem fantastic and anachronistic, probably from the outside, but on the inside, they don't. They seem real and right. So the story is about America, and we had to look for America. It's about her journey. I had spent some time, I had done at that point 2 movies in Georgia. So I'd spent some time down there. And also Lydia's from Atlanta. So I spent a little time down there. So I knew we were going to start in Georgia, and I knew we were going to start in Savannah. That I knew. But what I thought we were going to end up doing is going to Ohio, because that's really what does happen. He goes to Indiana in the novel, but the idea of the Underground Railroad, the real one, was to get to the River Jordan. The spirituals about the River Jordan are about the Ohio River. Other side of the Ohio River is the other side of the Mason-Dixon line. You have a shot at getting to Canada by doing that. So I thought it was important that we show America, that we show terrain. So we went out to Ohio and we loved what we saw for our movie. Nothing against it. It's a beautiful place. But we just didn't find what we thought was right for Valentine Farm. And then we went upstate New York to look for the same thing. And we did find it up there. It was beautiful. And it would have really felt very different. It felt Midwestern. It was up north of Albany near Cambridge, New York, a place actually something I discovered in New York City. For myself, that I'd never seen before. And we had a plan to sort of it was going to be a New York, Georgia, maybe one other state kind of shoot. But there wasn't really a tally being kept. I did notice that. And when the tally came in, it was not well received. And I think a time limit was given to us to figure it out or go home. And I remember sitting in a room with all the producers and Barry and James Laxton. And Barry pushed a note over to me as everybody's saying what we should do, and everybody knows this and that. Blah, blah, blah. Barry pushes me a little note that just says, "Fix this." That's all it says. Fix this. Not in a mean way. I think what he really meant was, can you make everybody stop talking and just go figure it out? Because it's going to come down to place. And I had already, by the end of the meeting, I had already figured it was a Jenga game. Please switch this one over there and move that over there. And maybe we could look for this over here. And we figured it out. And I just said, yeah, give me a week. And we set the movie in Georgia, and that saved the budget by keeping it all in one state, and also at that time, and I think still, it was a very sort of financially beneficial place for movies to work. They made it that way. We really helped the budget of the movie, and again, by being forced sort of to the edge of the cliff and not having everything we need to do what we thought we needed, we had to do what we didn't thought we needed. We had to try something else. And it made it better. We never would have done that interesting North Carolina. That was a crazy religious town we found, this sort of summer god camp that became that sort of ring of town where we put the church in the middle of it. It was crazy. It was crazy that it exists, that there was something like that out there. It was crazy that they let us make this story there, but they wanted the money. And it was, terrifyingly interesting to film. So I think it was about, I don't know, it's just about looking at the same things we've been looking at differently, and also realizing what a dynamic state Georgia is. It's huge. It's got so many different looks. It's got the mountains up towards Tennessee. It's got the flats down towards Florida. It's got the swamps over by Savannah. It has a lot of America in it. And that was a very interesting, a very beautiful experience. And also, we had a largely African-American crew, which was cool for those people. Similarly on Selma, and there's really good crews down there to work with. And they, it was hard. It was hard for people to have to be a part of some of the stories we were telling. But it also made us very close. And just to keep it interesting. And COVID. Let's end this all with COVID. And so we didn't even finish shooting, just to keep it really crazy. We had to come back 6 months later to get the last 4 days. I met Barry and his team on Beale Street.
Right.
I had been working with Ang, and I was going to go off with Ang and do something that was cost of that. I had lots and lots of money, and we're going to Paris and Costa Rica. No, I think it was the one with Will Smith where they were trying to make a digital human, and back then that was that was a big deal, such a big deal, and Weta made $40 million doing it, and now I can do it on my phone. But really. But I got called to do Beale Street, and Jeremy Kleiner called me, and I said, "Well, that sounds interesting." He said, "It's going to be low budget," and I said, "Oh well, okay." And he said, "But the only time Barry can meet is Sunday." I said, "But that's Father's Day. I can't do that. I draw the line there. I can't not have Father's Day." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, I can't. I got to be with my family on Father's Day." But my daughter came and heard the call. My daughter came to me and she said, "Hey, Dad, I didn't read all the books in high school, but one of the ones I did read that was my favorite book of all was If Beale Street Could Talk. And I think you should go take this meeting." And I said, "On Father's Day, don't you want to be together?" She said, "It's an hour. Just go." Go.
Smart daughter. Wow.
Smart ass So I went and met Barry, and to this day, every Father's Day, we send each other a happy anniversary text. It's actually
nice.
beautiful. And Barry, grew up without a father too. So not that I am that. I am his brother. So that was how we met. Beale Street was funny because they had just won the Oscar. These guys, Barry's team. I'm sure you guys talked about it. They all went to school together, and they kind of came as a packaged family in a lot of ways, not from where you think they might come. But they now are showing up to New York. Their first $1 million movie won an Oscar, and now they have $10 million, and they were feeling flush. And I had you asked about, working on sort of studio or real crews. Well, all of a sudden, 10 million in New York is a lot less than 1 million somewhere else, not union.
Yep.
Yeah,
not
really.
union. And they didn't want to hear that. They wanted to build everything. We were going to be in big studios. I was like, because we won the Oscar. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be the new guy. I'm the new guy who's going to give all the bad news. But it ended up working out. I mean, that's some of the work that I'm most proud of, Beale Street. And it's a beautiful film. And the connection between Barry and James is not nonverbal. Even it's just like there's some special spirit rope that connects their souls. and James and I, Roger, you get. I don't know if you do. I hope you do. But all my friends are cinematographers. I don't spend a lot of time trying to make cool things with other designers. I spend up time making cool things with photographers. And James and I have now done quite a lot together. And it's a relationship I cherish. It's familial. My time with those guys, but also, I think a lot of that is having survived Underground Railroad, the making of it, and the emotional experience of it. That was really a challenge. I know that Barry is really proud of it. It's something he's really proud of. So.
He should be. Yeah.
It's also like a bit of a question of like how to make trains go underground. There's a reason no one's done that before.
Yeah.
So that's what Barry's only note to me. He said, I don't know what this movie looks like, but all I can tell you is I want real trains underground. That's all I can tell you. Real trains driven by Black people underground. And I said, well, I'll get the trains, you get the Black people. And he said, okay. and we did. We figured it out. So.
And do you choose your films by director or by project? I mean, obviously collaboration is very important. And how do you determine whether the film is a good fit for you when you talk to a director?
I generally choose because of the filmmaker. I think the best script in the world could get mangled by somebody who doesn't know what to do with it. And a business card could be turned into a really interesting script by the right director. So generally, I'm interested in that collaboration. I think, again, I didn't really come up the ranks. I didn't apprentice. I just sort of went right to, in fact, was only me at the beginning. And then there started being more support for me. But that's the way I've sort of framed it as this collaboration. It's almost like a therapy sometimes that there's a lot of directors who have an instinct of what they want, but they don't have a vocabulary to find it, or they have sort of ideas floating around in there, and I kind of divine them into something between us. But generally, I choose collaboration. And at this point, 3.5 decades in, there's a few relationships that are kind of ongoing. So they're self-generated. When Darren has his next movie, generally I'm going to try to be available for that, and certain other directors, Barry for sure. Jim Jarmusch and I have made a bunch of movies together, and we have one coming out this year.
Oh, really?
Another spectacular human being. In fact, the funny story is when I first started doing this, and it was before the ice storm. It was before the Perez family. I hadn't done a union movie yet. Bob Yeoman told me, you need an agent. We had done this movie called The Paint Job. And I said, what's that? He said, this person who's going to help you get work and make your deals. And I was like, really? I said, I think isn't that for like actors and stuff? He said, no, you've got to do that. I said, oh, okay. So I had my 4 pictures, and I went out to Hollywood and went around and showed my pictures, and everybody said, no, thanks. No, don't think so. Don't think this business is for you. Nah, maybe try something else. Click, clam, slam, slam, slam. And then Bob was at Smith Gusnell Nicholson, which was one of the early below the line agencies. And he said, well, you should go there. I said, well, if all the smaller ones have thrown me out on my face, why are these guys? He said, go take the meeting. So I went up there and I sat with those guys. I believe I showed them pictures of me and my dog in Montana, on a hill in Montana, as my portfolio. But I think my jokes were landing that day. I think I was, and at the end, I'd pick up my stuff to leave. Just sort of, I was going to save them the trouble of throwing me out. And they said, no, we want to sign you. And I said, what? And they said, we think we want to sign you. I said, why? And they said, well, we think you're funny. And I said, really? And it's actually Ann Murtha, who was a junior agent at that point, or just starting out there. I think she had some instinct about me for some reason. And now we've been together for 35 years and she's one of my dear friends. But at that interview or at that meeting, they said, now that we're signing you, just tell us who are the directors you like? And I was caught off guard. And so I answered honestly. I said, I don't know, Jim Jarmusch, Mel Brooks. And that was my range. And they were like, what? And but it's true. I mean, I grew up on Mel Brooks's movies as a younger person. And then Jim's movies are why I love movies and they were like, okay, sure. And the irony is I've worked with Jim Jarmusch and Mel Brooks in my life and enjoyed both. Well, Jim is a good friend, but I really enjoyed the experience working with Mel, even though it wasn't necessarily my kind of movie.
Was Coffee and Cigarettes your first one with Jim?
Yeah, that was another one of those, who can we get to work for $150 a week? And then not be able to afford to pay them. But I had seen some of the Coffee and Cigarettes shorts. I think they had played on Saturday Night Live and a couple other places. So when I got called, I was like, yeah, yes, yes. And yeah, that was the first one. Very small, very cool, really cool.
And did it take 15 years to finish?
Well, he had made one or two along the way, and then he sat down to turn it into a feature and do a block of 5 more. And so that's what I was there for the sort of big chunk.
And then when you were talking about Mel Brooks, you also did The Producers, the movie based on a play, based on a movie, the Mel Brooks movie. So when you were designing that, were you referencing more the play than the original movie?
No,
because it was a musical.
A little. Mel was the most, I think at that point, next to The Lion King, the most successful Broadway musical at that point. I mean, it was still on when we were making it. So there was sort of an instinct to not change it in a way. But I remember going to the theater, we watched it, and then Stroman took us backstage. And, theater sets are suggestions. They're small and they're poetic. You fill them in a lot from the audience. But when you see them, there's not that much there. It doesn't work like that so much for us.
Mm-hmm.
Roger, I don't know if you've worked at Steiner Studios in New York.
Never.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah. Up until right around the time of The Producers, a stage in New York meant a warehouse in Yonkers. And we didn't have stages. I mean, there were a couple from like TV shows in the 50s, small little things, but there weren't really stages. And Doug Steiner built this complex in the Navy Yard, and this was the first film to shoot there. And we were building the sets on the inside while they were finishing building the studio on the outside, literally. But Schubert Alley, I was like, all right, I'm going to have a little fun now. And Schubert Alley is built through 4 stages. We built it right through the elephant doors. We had an incredible team on that movie. And Stroman is a lovely, lovely person. I think the film suffered because we tried to make the Broadway show. I think without getting too deep into it, I think we learned right after that. I think we were watching Singing in the Rain and a lot of movies from once long ago where the camera's pretty relaxed and static. I mean, and the actors do all the moving. And I think we were a little too enamored of that. And maybe a slightly more dynamic camera might have helped the storytelling a little bit in that case. But I've never had more fun making a movie. It was like going to a Broadway show every day. It was amazing. I remember there was the day when I had to show Max Bialystock came to rehearse, and Nathan Lane was a big deal while The Producers was on Broadway, and no one was allowed to talk to him, and no one was allowed to look at him, and Stroman was crazy, terrified he was going to do something bad, and so we're in the room getting it ready, and all of a sudden, he's coming. So everybody scurries, and I jump in a closet and close the door. So in the middle of the scene, in the rehearsal, Nathan decides to get in the closet.
Oh.
So he comes in the closet and shuts the door and looks over, and there I am. And he says, hello. I remember that. Hello. It was lovely. But I don't know, every day there was something super fun and crazy like that. But as you both probably know, there's a sort of the algorithm is the more fun you have making it, probably the less successful it will be.
Yep.
And the more you bleed
so
and the
true.
more it hurts and the more you get yelled at, the better the chance of it being a super spectacular.
That is so true.
2 nights ago, we screened for the 25th anniversary of Pollock, which was a very hard movie to make, but a very beautiful. It was really like 25 years later, we got to see it on screen and in Sag Harbor, pretty close to where it happened. And I mean, it's a very, very hard movie to make, for Ed playing this crazy suicidal maniac and being a method actor / director. So therefore, for all of us, because it was like working with Pollock, the director. There's no money. It was incredibly ambitious, but I don't often let myself feel good about things I've been a part of. But at 25 years, I think you're allowed. That's the statute of limitations. And I allowed myself to enjoy watching that screen.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask about MUFASA because that's an animated piece, but you were the production designer on it. How did that differ than working on a film? How'd you go about it?
It's a good question. Lion King is not the call you think you're going to get from Barry Jenkins. Just
right.
That's not
at all.
We did Beale Street, the first Baldwin novel ever made into a film. We did Underground Railroad, maybe one of the most important novels about that experience ever written. And next up, Lion King prequel. Barry said, I know you're not going to want to do this, but I'm doing this. What do you think? I said, well, if you're doing it, I'm doing it. But what are we doing? And so, unlike in The Soup, this is $1 billion property, and the people who own it have something to, have a vested interest in how it turns out. And it was, I thought, kind of a brave choice on their part to go with someone like Barry, try to give the story maybe a different, a more dynamic humanity, if lions can have humanity, lion anatomy. And so, we looked at this. It was a pretty good script, pretty interesting telling, although Barry did a lot of work on it in the 4 years that it took him to make it. And I didn't really know what to expect. It was, I don't know if you've seen them, but it's CG as if it's real. It's made to look photoreal. Everything is made in incredible detail, except that the lions sing. So everything is real except for the characters, which is kind of weird, but maybe also cool. I don't know. So there was a learning curve. The way they had done the last one, the Favreau one, was they had done a very modest previs and then shipped it all over to MPC, and that's where the movie was made.
Mm-hmm.
There were shots set, camera set, but generally no one really knew what it was until it got made over there. And I was like, oh, is that really the only way to do this? Is there a way where we can start building the sets and then they could just get plussed and plussed and plussed until they become real? And at first I was like, no, maybe, actually, why not? And that's what we in fact did. And so instead of having a team of grizzled carpenters and mechanics, I had millennial gamers, people who build games but actually those were the people who did the building. And the work is terraforming, basically creating, in this case, landscapes. The design issue was that I thought, and again, I don't mean to disparage anybody. These comments are just my feelings personally. But I thought, for me, one of the limitations of the first movie was that it felt not like Africa as much as it felt like Disney's Africa. It felt kind of like an amalgam Africa. Mm-hmm. Now, in fairness, that story is all set kind of in one place. It's in the neighborhood. It goes to the edge of the neighborhood and it comes back. Our story is a journey. So I had a little more opportunity to explore place. But my first note to Barry was, I think it's important that the journey is verifiably African, that we go from here to there, to here, to there, to there. And that's how we define the places. I think it'll make it the geography will unfold in a more interesting way, just in the way that continents do. But I also think it'll be there's all this Africa in this movie, there's African actors, there's African music. Why can't the place be for real? We can push it a little bit here and there. We can add a rock and make it, make it ours, but the topography should belong to these places. And he 100% agreed. And at the end of the day, Disney they came around and really liked that idea that we honored the place. And the idea was to go to Africa, take the journey, find it, and then make it. But COVID happened. And so we couldn't go anywhere. And in fact, for the first year of that movie, we were in our houses working, which was also kind of cool. I'd never done anything like that before. I was just sort of getting used to this idea of what we're doing now, sort of communicating through the computer. And all of a sudden, VR comes into my life. I've never played a video game in my life. I never got the headsets over my glasses. I've never been able to experience VR before. And now, every single day, I'm wearing a headset all day, and I'm literally flying around in virtual space. And I think the big takeaway of me making that movie, the sort of profound, if you can believe it, the profound takeaway from making that movie was, for me, the realization that virtual space is space. It's a place. It's not a place that I can necessarily walk to without the goggles, but I can go there with them. And not only is it a place that I can go to, it's a place that I can be infinitely small if I feel like it, or I can be big enough to step over the mountain if I want. In fact, I can move the mountain if I want. And on top of that, I think James was in LA, or James was in London, Barry was in LA, I was in Long Island, and we would meet in the set. Somehow these brilliant engineers got us to be able to scout from our houses Africa that I was making in Unreal, basically. And so I thought that was incredibly cool that we literally, we would go in and scout just like we do. We none of us are animators. We do what we do. Barry would say, make the place and then I'll scout it and I'll figure out where we're shooting. So we'd make a place and then we'd scout. And then sometimes they'd be like, could you just move the tree over? Could we have another this? Or maybe they go there. It changed a lot, but it was pretty cool. Like in a big movie, if I have to build a lot of exterior stuff, I'm building stuff and I'm putting it on the ground. In this movie, I got to make the ground. And then I got to make the sky. And the deal was like, I owned up to the horizon and I gave James above the horizon. But we, making skies. Roger, what if you could make the skies you wanted all the time? I mean, it's kind of nice.
I don't know. Well, we haven't gone quite that extreme, but we were involved in animation for quite a long time. So we got experience of that. I was kind of interested in your career. You just did one kind of Marvel movie. You did one Spider-Man, right? Your choices have always been, you're hiding your face. I did read that you regretted it after you had taken it, but is that right?
I mean, it was a cool experience. It was $300 million in New York City. I remember the head of the studio came while we were building the Noah's Ark in an armory, a pretty big set. And he said, Mark, this is amazing that you can get all these people to work that hard. How do you do it? I said, well, I'm not sure I'm doing it. They're hardworking people. He says, no, what is it that you do to make them want to work that hard? I said, well, probably they know that I care a lot more about them than I do about you. And he liked that. He understood that's, that. So building big things can be fun. And I think Spider-Man was the biggest movie ever in New York. And you had mentioned Hulk before, but when Aang went to do Hulk, I didn't get to go because I wasn't experienced enough at that point. I was
you weren't allowed to go.
I was an indie guy. And the big money that now, Aang had made these teeny little Taiwanese movies while we were making Ice Storm. Sense and Sensibility came out. All of a sudden he was a known person. He hadn't been before. And then Ice Storm. And so, and then we did Ride with the Devil, which was an epic giant thing that didn't quite land certainly popularly. And so when Aang went off to do Hulk, the brain trust out there decided that they would go with Rick Heinrichs, who had done more of this kind of work. And Aang didn't have a lot of experience. And also, he knew there were going to be a lot of VFX. And what computer effects were was a new kind of, no one knew anything about it except Rick. But it broke my heart, both because I was, left at the altar by myself and didn't get to go to Hollywood because I thought, well, that's what you should want to do, right? If that's the goal, isn't it, to get to do these big movies? So what ended up happening was I ended up going to do Far From Heaven with Todd Haynes, and I said to myself, "Oh, there's a lesson there." I didn't like the Hulk. I loved Far From Heaven, and that's so. And this maybe goes back to the question you asked a few questions ago. I think at that point I said, "Well, I think from now on I'm going to try to work on movies that I might go see." And if it's a movie that I wouldn't want to go see, then I don't want to work on it anymore. Except that I broke my rule and Spider-Man. Well, first of all, I liked Spider-Man growing up. He was a New York guy. And Mark Webb is a super nice man. But honestly, it's a lot of rubble. Just rubble. That's all it is. Rubble. Things to break. And terrific talents. Emma and, I don't know, just great actors. It just, for me, I don't know what it is. I didn't like it. I didn't like the experience, so much so that when Todd Phillips sent me Joker, I passed before I read it because I just thought, I just assumed it was another thing like that until Randy Poster said, well, "What are you, crazy? Read it." I was like, "I'm not doing another one of those things." And he said, "Read it." And I read it and I was like, "Oh, that's cool."
So, but now having done the prequel to The Lion King, on that technology, and now your experience of that technology, does that change your view of where you're going to go with design and where filmmaking is going to go, really?
Two questions. The first question is, I think it doesn't change design, it just changes process, design process.
Right.
So for example, right after Mufasa, I did the Joker FOLIE À DEUX movie, which was another musical. And all of a sudden, I had these new millennial friends who I brought in, and we pre-built all the sets digitally so we could see them before we built them. So rather than spending $2 million on dead and murdering trees, we just made them in digitally to look at to see where might a good place. And we worked with we worked carefully with camera department to move some walls around and make some places to put lights or places to put cranes or places. Just there was a chance to do it before it was built and also to see the movie. So that was kind of exciting and cool. I think the scary part is that the corollary of that is at some point that might be all we do. That might be the way we make the sets.
All right. But I was going to say, you do it in previs, but did you actually add more in the final image instead of building it than you would have done?
No, and that movie was mostly interior. The exteriors we did, like Gotham itself was largely made, but our goal was to make it as plate-based as possible. So it's actually San Francisco Bay with a little bit of Alcatraz married to a plate shot in Weehawken, New Jersey, across the Hudson, taking the New York skyline and the California skyline and overlaying them, and then taking the buildings of the city and moving them around, and then shooting plates of individual buildings. Because I actually did the post on that, because all of a sudden I fancied myself a VFX guy after Mufasa. But so that was, and it's always going to be better at plate-based. And it's also always going to be better if you sort of are forced into sort of contortions. If you have to sort of be in an odd position to make the picture, to take it, it might be good. If everything is easy and down the middle, then you'll just make the right decisions. And great, who needs the right decisions? The world is wow. So I'm not afraid to fill things in digitally. That exists now. I'm not afraid of it. It's a reality. It's really useful outdoors on big epic exteriors. And what's cool about it is in the old days or earlier on, as a designer, you'd make the set and you'd hope they did something good with it in post. And now I can design the whole thing, and then we build the part we're going to build, and then they build the part they're going to build. And so I think it's
they have a reference.
Yeah, I think it's a better process. And I also don't think it's ever going to be good enough that actor touches green wall and you replace it. I think always we're going to have a sweet spot of something that's tactile. I hope.
Is it the actor that touches the green wall? That's the point.
Yeah.
You and your fake humans.
Oh, you mean they won't even be the actor? Yeah.
Well, really, yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. I don't know. I don't want to be scared of the future. I don't want to be scared of technology.
Right. All right.
Because it's going to come anyway.
But also, it's always come. And when Photoshop came out, all the illustrators were sure it was going to put them out of work. It just made them powerful. So this new stuff, it's, that's just because it's smart and can do a lot. It doesn't mean you can use it well. You still have to figure it out. And there's a whole new language, vibe coding. There's a whole new language of how to prompt and how to interact with your new digital best friends. I don't know. I do know that we were looking at a science fiction animation thing with Aronofsky, with Darren, called Human Nature at the beginning of these generative programs a couple of years ago. And the mistakes that the computer made were fascinating. It would confuse words in architecture, and all of a sudden you'd have a H where there should be a building. And my brain couldn't come up with that, no matter how good my drugs were. I don't think I could ever come up with something that messed up. It was cool. So, I mean, it used to be the hit on you don't want to do digital because it can't make good mistakes the way us real artists can make mistakes. And I don't know, I made some pretty good digital mistakes on MUFASA. I don't know. Let's not be scared of it, but let's know that it's there. I think maybe the thing to be scared of is where to put all these humans who used to do things that might not have as much to do. I mean, it's good. That'll be interesting. But, I'll tell you one thing about MUFASA. We didn't kill any trees, and well, that's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
One of the things that's hardest about what I do is how much I'm forced to waste. And I'm not going to get too political now, but it is something I've been thinking a lot about. And just watching, when I walk by the forest, the trees lean away from me. I'm marked. But
yeah, but then on the other hand, there's the amount of power supply you need for all these systems. I mean, it's a huge amount of power. Where does the power come from?
Yeah. Well, one thing we did on Joker was I made a rule on Joker that every wall had to work in 3 sets. And so we designed it that way.
Oh, right.
And then here in New York, we're trying very hard to sort of, in the old days, you used to be like, hey, Mark, you can't save that stuff. You take the work away from a guy. Hey, Mark, what are you doing? and I'm like, well, actually, think about it this way. Let's say the budget doesn't change. By having someone sort of take the nails out of that wood that we can sell or give to or reuse, you're actually changing the money from things to people.
Yeah.
So and now a lot of the people in New York are working together in our productions to pass flats around, pass walls around, pass buildings around. So that part's kind of nice. And I think also digital platforms help that, and also gives us a chance to help smaller movies sometimes. So. But, I don't know. It's a giant question.
It is.
There will be fully AI movies soon. They may or may not be good, but there will always be somebody with a camera still shooting on film. I believe it. Pollock shot on film. It's very beautiful.
Very good. All right.
It's been great, Mark. Thank you for this. Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and very funny.
Well, I don't know.
Lovely story.
I can be funny. I don't know, punchy. But I will say also, I read books and don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I don't watch too much TV. I do watch movies, and your movies are uniquely spectacular. And so I feel very honored that you guys called me to do this. And I'm saying it on the podcast. Don't edit it.
Thank you so much.
Waiting for the day when I get to make a set for you.
I just can't believe your credits. I mean, your list of credits is amazing, and your choices, your credits and the directors you've worked with, and the range that you've of stuff you've created over your career so far. I look forward to the next one.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, thank you guys very much. Nice talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.